everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening. My name is Blair Murphy. I'm the curator of exhibitions at MoCA Arlington, and I'm really excited to be here tonight with Adele Kenworthy here at MoCA's Innovation Studio and Store. Adele has been the artist in residence here for the last almost 6 weeks, participating in the residency program we have here, and working on some projects in the space, engaging with the public, doing some workshops. So we're going to talk a little bit about the work she's been doing here and also her previous work and her practice in general. If you're not familiar with MoCA Arlington, we have an exhibitions program, an education program. We do a lot of free public programming here at the Innovation Studio and at the main museum space. And then we have artist residencies. We have an artist residency program at the main museum that's longer term, and then this program here at the Innovation Studio that's a shorter 6-week residency. We have a couple events coming up that I wanted to plug. So on April 4th, we're going to have a workshop with Lex Marie, who is going to be the next artist in residence here at the Innovation Studio. So Lex will be moving in, I think, next week, and then doing a workshop on April 4th. And then on April 9th, at the main museum location, which is on Wilson Boulevard near the Virginia Square Metro, we'll have an artist talk with Milan Warner. Milan is one of our artists in residence at the main museum, and she'll be talking with artist Foon Sham about her solo show, which is currently on view. We have all of our new spring exhibitions open at the museum. They're up until the end of May, so I would definitely encourage you to go by there and see those shows, and then put those upcoming artist talks on your calendar. But I'm excited to be here tonight with Adele. I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we'll have a conversation, and then take some questions from the audience as well. So Adele is a 1.5 generation Korean American artist organizer whose work reclaims Korea's entangled history of occupation and war. Their work has been exhibited at the Smithsonian National Museum of Asian Art, the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, Corcoran School of Arts and Design in Washington, D.C., Brentwood Arts Exchange, and Towson University's Asian Arts and Culture Center in Maryland, and at Art Basel Miami Beach, amongst others. Kenworthy has participated in Transformer Gallery's 20th year of their exercises for emerging artists in Washington, D.C., and in artist residencies at the Washington Postgrad Resident Lab, the Nicholson Project, 411 Collective, Empower DC, Chinatown Art Studio, and Chinatown Art Studios. Adele's work has been featured in the Washington Post, Hyperallergic, District Fray, Be More Art, Washingtonian, NBC Washington, and on Fox 45 in Baltimore. Adele holds her MFA in Social Practice Art, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, with a focus in public policy from the Corcoran School of Arts and Design at George Washington University, and received the 2022 Outstanding MFA Award. So Adele, it's great to be here with you. I wanted to start off a little bit talking about social practice, which is the sort of genre, I guess, that we have been discussing a lot in terms of your work. It's something that might be a little bit new to people, but it's the term we use to describe sort of a body of work and different ways that contemporary artists are working that really focuses on social engagement. So rather than creating objects, the focus is really on creating experiences, especially collective experiences. So setting up situations, and environments where people interact with one another and with this scenario that the artist has created. It sort of grew out of traditions from throughout the 20th century. There was a big push in the 50s. The art movement Fluxus would do these big happening events. And then in the 1960s and the 1970s, some visual artists started experimenting pretty frequently with performance art. So something that wasn't exactly theater, but was happening in a sort of gallery and then eventually museum context. There was sort of a shift from thinking about the art object to thinking about how we experience, how art sort of creates some kind of experience. I think that's a little bit sort of where social practice then comes out of. Really that focus on, creating a collective experience for. You got interested in working in this way?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great overview, I feel like, of the whole practice. Like, we can just go home. But I heard Chanupa Hanska Lugger, who's this incredible, like, interdisciplinary artist. I saw him in an interview where he described his work as something that removes the idea of art as an object and to think of art as something living. And before I pursued my MFA in social practice at the Corcoran, my background is actually in like nonprofit arts administration and mostly in regional theater spaces. So like the transition from theater to socially engaged art like actually makes like total sense that I didn't put the two together until recently, which I'm so grateful for, that insight. But I wholeheartedly believe bringing art to life takes a village, and the necessity of the human connection for it to happen, like that's, what keeps me going. And I keep going back to, I keep thinking about Marina Abramovich's documentary, The Artist is Present, and where she was debating whether or not to work with David Blaine or not. And her like curator, confidant, friend was saying like the difference between her work and David Blaine is that when he bleeds for a performance, it's an illusion, but when she bleeds, it's real. And so like in this mindset is how I ground my work through this tension between visibility and spectacle within that engagement context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and David Blaine is a magician.
Yeah,
right? So he
yeah.
sort of creates that more sort of spectacle of an experience.
He's an illusionist.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I just I want to respect that space also, but
yeah.
it's
no, that's a good clarification.
yeah.
Well, one of the other things that's really influenced a lot of your practice is your experience as someone who's Korean American and as part of the Asian American diaspora. Can you talk, just to give people kind of a grounding, can you talk a little bit about that? How that kind of becomes part of your work or has influenced your work?
Yeah, as the gestures and rituals we hold as places of comfort. And so, like my mom's rituals of visible hope, which aren't necessarily in museum or archival spaces, are my last living connection to my heritage. And Lisa Lowe in Immigrant Acts wrote, the making of Asian American culture includes practices that are partly inherited, partly modified, as well as partly invented. And so in honoring this place of inheritance and invention, I've dug into what has lived in me as, like fractured and fragmented memories of my family, pulled from here and there and just intertwining them into what I make. And when I talk about memory work and memory culture, especially how we hold, counter memories in public spaces, like I actively consider and contend with Clint Smith's essay that was published a few years ago on how nostalgia has been used as a tool, if not a weapon, by those in power to rewrite history. And so, I don't claim like to have this expertise or scholarly knowledge in Korean culture or even in American culture. But what's really kept me grounded is like there is absolutely no part of me that can be removed from my work, and that this is my lived experience and not an assumption of a lived experience. And that this is my inheritance that is partly modified, partly invented through my mom, through me, and now through my kids.
We can kind of, maybe a helpful place to go from there is talking about some specific projects to give people a sense of,
Excuse
sorry.
me.
Bang San-hwa Flower Hands, which is a work that you started a few years ago, I think.
Yeah.
This image on the right, I think, is that from the Corcoran?
Yeah, it's at the Corcoran. So there's this question that I've asked my mom growing up, and I still continue to ask her, and it's, what is something you always wished I had asked and knew about you? And so in 2022, it became a participatory performance that I did for opening night at the first Corcoran-wide exhibition since the pandemic. That's why you see us still wearing masks. Like we're still figuring out how to be around each other again in physical spaces. But there were over 2,000 visitors that's based in the traditional practice. And it's rooted in my own memories of care embodied. At sleepover parties, watching Korean dramas with like friends, or even just passing time with my mom and my sister. And what I visioned for this performance was to offer gestures of adornment as a place of collective liberation. And so it also continued to live on part of the pandemic. And the Nicholson Project grew the flowers in their garden, and participants got to pick their own flowers and petals to make their own. An undergraduate Asian American Literature Studies course, like Very Sad Lab, grew them during their residency at Eaton Hotel. I led a workshop as part of the annual Asia North exhibition in Baltimore, and also at the Kid Museum, which is a youth maker space in Bethesda. And I've also mailed the seeds all across the country, like San Diego, Maine, Philadelphia, New York, and Ohio are a few of the places. And people have just shared photos of them growing the flowers and also dyeing their nails.
So you're growing the flowers from the seeds
Yeah.
in some of these contexts, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is something that you did growing up, and is sort of something from the diaspora, from Korean culture.
Yeah, like my mom, she said, because like she lived on the countryside, like there wasn't really much to do. Everything about being a kid back then was figuring out how not to be bored. And so part of it was making this dye and dyeing your nails. But growing up, we didn't just use the flowers. There's also these little packets of powder. And the flower is in the same family as henna. So we would use the little packets.
And there's another project that is sort of a helpful, a little bit of a precursor that influenced the work you then eventually did here at the Innovation Studio, which are your cut fruit performances. Can you tell us a little bit about the beginning of the cut fruit performances and the different forms they've taken?
Yeah, the performance with Cut Fruit began in 2022 when I was invited to Transformers Exercises for Emerging Artists program. And that year the theme was artistic interventions. And so during my time at the gallery, I came into construction crews that were even working along the street. I organized a cut fruit and grassroots organizing workshop for AAPI FEM artists and cultural workers based around DC. And I also created a collage series that included photo submissions from the public, my own family archive, and found historical images. And I also invited my mom to collaborate by cutting fruit for the workshop. You can't see her, but she's like turned around. And also commissioning a garden flag that she sewed, which is a skill that she had learned from her mother. And so last year in 2024, Cut Fruit came to the National Museum of Asian Art on what I felt like was the hottest day of the year. It was 100-degree weather, and I was wearing this dress. So when I put this dress on, I was like, why is it so hot? We came with over 300 pounds of Asian pear and Korean melons for their Smithsonian Solstice Saturday celebration. And I cut fruit for hundreds of visitors while inviting them to share stories of comfort and love with artists Zina Ni and Tu Nguyen. And I love them. And so the hotter it got, the more, the hotter it got, the more I wanted to cut fruit for everyone. And the more I cut fruit, the more we all showed up for one another. like Nicole Dowd and her team, Demi and Janice, I love them. They were in the back prepping the fruit, and I had a museum volunteer who stood next to me and cleared the peels and washed the cutting board. And my brother, and some of you met at my workshop, stood next to me with an electric fan. So even though it was so hot, people still waited. And this longing to share and hold space with one another was just so visceral and palpable and just undeniable.
And the practice of cutting fruit, the roots of that as an aspect of your work comes also from your childhood experience with that as an expression of care.
Yeah, like I speak very little Korean and my mom speaks very little English. And so as I grew older, like the cultural and language barriers just grew more and more. But this was one of the gestures that it's almost, of all the things that we couldn't say to one another, this kind of lived within that space.
That's really amazing. I didn't know that. And that brings us to what you've been working on during the residency and how which sort of built a little bit on the previous cut fruit performances, and you're thinking about those traditions. And can you talk a little bit about what you've been doing here and how what's behind us relates as well?
Yeah. When I once described the idea, and I loved your question because it just it provides so much context. But when I first described the idea of cut fruit to someone, they responded like, "Oh, you must have been such a healthy family." Like I would have asked for like cake and cookies, and their comment didn't work. But I recently heard Imani Perry describe so eloquently in her Fresh Air interview that Black culture and life has time and time again created beauty at the site of wounds. And so, like the earliest memories I have are of these walks with my mom where she'd like pick wildflowers on the side of the road and then adorning me in this floral jewelry. And it wasn't until years later I realized that she shared this gesture while we had lived in hiding at a women's shelter. And it wasn't until I became a mom I understood what it meant for both of us. And so in this place of adorning in wildflowers and in cutting fruit, they kind of live in this beauty at the site of wounds. So during this residency, I was interested in persimmons. I've been inviting others to join me by making a persimmon out of clay. And when they made this persimmon, I asked people to call this number and leave a message sharing a memory that they've held or carried for someone that they love or once loved. And in each clay persimmon, this is my favorite part, is an NFC tag, which they're these little round plastic tags where if you put your phone up to the clay persimmon, it'll link to the message, and you can actually listen to their memory on your phone. And so, like this idea that natural preservation of food cultures spans like thousands of years of memories while also holding 35 years of mine. And thinking about how art can scale lifetimes is just so magical to me.
Yeah. What were some of the sort of interactions or responses to the project? Either, I guess, sort of more generally or any specific interactions?
I know we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but I'm so forever grateful to MoCA Arlington for bringing me into a community that you've built and cultivated and nurtured, where visitors will come in and talk to me and will just be game to try out something that they don't fully understand. and there exists this like grace in meeting each other where we are, and in this right to opacity, as Aruna D'Souza speaks about in her book Imperfect Solidarities, there's this respect that even moments of this work that can't be translated, spoken, or understood, that solidarity is held regardless. And I often ask in my work, like, what can centering kinship building and community engaged art look like, modeled on trust and reciprocity, like art that resists the extractive and the transactional, but that this mutual exchange exists as mutual aid. I'm just like so floored to witness it flourishing here. That's rooted by you, Blair, and
so
Amanda,
much.
and Katie, and Sarah, and Gwen, and Jasper. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you. And thank you so much for being here and bringing all of your work into the space and your practice and your, it wouldn't have been, possible without that.
Don't make me cry. I don't want to cry yet.
I was curious too about some of the research aspects of your work. In addition to the event, the sort of experiences you're thinking about and bringing to the public, there's a lot that goes into that as far as the sorts of research you're doing. And I'm always really interested in artists who do have a more research element to their practice, because you can kind of be in this space but can you share a little bit about the sorts of research you do and what that brings to your practice?
Yeah. I guess what really started me on my journey in my work with public memory and memory culture was when I was at the Corcoran studying for my MFA. I was working in flowers as a material and started researching, looking for historical accounts of floral arranging in Korean culture. And I checked out this book from the library, which was this floral arranging book by this Korean florist that was published in the 90s. And the florist wrote in this book that the origin of this practice of floral arranging, which is widely attributed to Japan as ikebana, is appropriated from the Korean practice of kongyongwa, which is placing flowers at the feet of Buddha. And just to offer some context to modern Korean history, Japan wrongfully occupied Korea, a sovereign nation, from 1910 to the end of World War II. And so I mentioned this to a scholar and researcher at GW, and her first question was, is this verifiable? And as I dug deeper, looking for the answer to that question, and why I'm so grateful to research this in the context as an artist, is that another question could emerge, and it was, whose and what memories is this florist carrying that called her to say that in the first place? And what we refer to and accept as official and formal archives, and what we see in the legibility of lived experiences. I'm most interested in finding traces of this act and how we hold the lives of others, and how do we keep it sacred.
Yeah, and find those threads that are there in these different texts that might be unexpected.
Yeah.
The research side of your practice is also something that you're working, I guess, relates to a project you have been working on and are going to be continuing after this, related to Alexandria. I thought that might be of interest with the local focus.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
I will, just so we have something nice to look at.
Yeah.
So, rooted in this place of holding memory and gestures, my research this year is really driven by this question of how do we preserve the unspoken oral histories held by our bodies, the muscle part of muscle memory, especially in the AAPI diaspora's presence in the DC area. And so, like, I grew up in Southeast Virginia in like the Tidewater region, but we always had family and friends in the Northern Virginia area. And I remember the 3-hour car rides just to visit like Lotte Mart and stopping by Sheila Bakery in Annandale and eye shopping at Little Thingamajigs. And I visited Old Town Alexandria like many, many, many times and was just floored to only recently learn about the presence and legacy of Chinese hand laundries there. And seeing what's happening in Chinatown and DC, what specific narratives and archival spaces, both physical and digital. What I've been exploring, preserve their work during hostile times. For example, like how Khmer artists protected their work during the Cambodian genocide. And so, are these skills that we as artists and cultural workers should be learning right now?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I wanted to see if there are any audience questions for Adele.
I have a question. What is it into the physical art form?
I love that question. I love Ocean Vuong, so I quote him all the time. But I listened to him talk about his process and how he loves to just walk. And so part of his practice is he walks and walks and walks and walks and walks, and then he writes. And he's not the kind of writer that has like pages and pages and pages of writing in that sense. And it's like, oh, then I'm not necessarily the artist that makes and makes and makes and makes, but I think a lot, and I tap into like I love Poetry Unbound. I love Krista Tippett. Like I'm always looking for what artists are saying now and what they're looking for now and what they're seeking now, and how in this, I guess, collective sense of we're all working towards the same thing. Like, what are we all saying? And yeah, does that make sense? I'm sorry.
Great. Is there another question?
So I had a question about, it's always interesting to me for diaspora artists about the interaction between the diaspora and the motherland, right? So how have you gotten any kind of reaction or feedback at all from folks in Korea about your lived experience as a Korean American and in your art?
That's a great question. My family came to the States when I was 2, and I haven't been back to Korea since. I still have family there. It's almost like all these years I was kind of waiting, like, Mom, when are we going back? Like, let's go back together. She's been back plenty of times, but we have not gone back together. And so there is this, like, when she's gone back, she says, like, this past year, she has lived in the States longer than she ever lived in Korea. And she has said when she goes back, it doesn't feel like home anymore. And that's still something I contend with. Like, I have, like, there was this incredible exhibition at DC Commission the Arts in their gallery where Philippa Hughes and Anthony Lay did a exhibition to kind of commemorate like 50 years of the Vietnamese American diaspora. And what they were seeing, like, there's not one way for me to explore this, and whether it's directly linked to Korea as the motherland or if it's within the diaspora itself, like however it'll form the way that it needs to and the way that it should. But yeah. Yeah. Gosh.
Hey Adele, how are you? I just wanted to ask a question. I guess I find your work, it's really moving because while, okay, I feel like you have multiple ways of engaging with the story in it, and that like, well, maybe personally I can't relate to your specific family narratives or like cultural ones, but I can relate to stories of love or care or like, and so like I've listened to some of the stories of the Parsimmon one, and it was really moving, and but I think that's nice how you have those different levels of not entry, but I guess like relatability depending on audience. But something I was curious about is because I know you've talked about how your work in a way is your like resistance against occupation. You talked about with Korean history, and then you're trying to express that as well. Do you find it challenging, or how do you address the balance between, I guess, like sharing resistance, or I'm trying to find the right way to phrase this question. I was struggling with it for a while, but like resistance being an energy and part of it, but also there's strong communal narratives as well, and trying to bring people together and to feel collectively together. Does that, I don't know if you feel that you can speak to that a little, or, okay.
I'll say what's coming to mind, but you let me know if you're like, no, Adele, like we need to talk later. And like, great, like we can do that, you know, like we can talk this through. So when it comes to specific narratives around, when I'm thinking about just the memory of the occupation of in Korea by Japan, like I'm really thinking of like memories that have been passed down in my family of like, this is what it was like, this is what we experienced, and like how those are the ones that I carry, and I'm not necessarily an artist that I can carry these memories and think of them in different ways, like partly modified from what grassroots organizing looks like. And I would say I'm issues agnostic, but I'm like most interested in building people power. Like, how do we build more people power? You know, how do we bring what is more than celebrating my capacity as an artist and bringing together a space? What is the capacity of the community to come together? And so I'm still finding the threads that bring those two.
That's wonderful. And I know I didn't fully form the question before asking, so I think that was a great reflection. And also, even just I was thinking like, but yeah, just bringing people together can also totally be an act of resistance. Again, something different, but yeah, thank you. I'm really interested in your work and like the multiplicity of meanings or like ways it can be interacted with. So yeah, I just was curious to hear you talk about that. Thank you.
Sorry, give me a second. I just had crazy deja vu. So, but I'm back. No, I totally forgot my question. Art. I'm so sorry. Thank you for being here for the last 6 weeks. I've really enjoyed your work. Can you talk a little bit more about your kind of bridging the gap between your work as a theater administrator and becoming kind of your own artist and choosing this form and working in kind of a very different, I wouldn't say very different, but it is the visual or contemporary art sphere is definitely a separate sphere than the theater sphere. So why did you kind of gravitate towards this platform And what were the first steps you were kind of making towards the artist that you are today?
That's a great question. There is that, I mentioned a little bit before about the line between in thinking of performance in a theater context and in a visual arts context. There's this very, in theater, there's the audience and then there's the performers, and the story is already told. But what I love about socially engaged art is that the story hasn't been told yet, and that what lives in this space will live differently in another space. But to go back to your question about just being in arts administration, like 99% of being an artist feels like it's a lot of admin work. Like I stare at spreadsheets a lot, you know, like a lot of my skills in that definitely has transferred in how to think about financial resilience as an artist, and a lot of that comes with administrative work. But when it comes to kind of merging for me is thinking of art as a village, be grounded in that. Because you've made this happen. You've had an incredible response piece to my work, and like it was amazing making miniature fruit or food that carries memories of love and comfort for you. And so I love that. I love all of this.
Great. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Adele, again,
you.
for being here, for the residency and for the talk this evening. And thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to everyone streaming at home. If folks want to come up and interact with the persimmons, if they haven't, we have a few minutes to do that. So.